me today because she's got a good eye for restoration. Danielle is definitely a little unpredictable, but always a good time.
What the is right? Eat your banana.
This is out of control.
I'm going all in on this one.
I need a straitjacket and a muzzle.
For 3 years, cameras kept filming Brandi Passante as one half of a couple that no longer existed. That was the Brandi Storage Wars built. Off camera, she had already been smeared for what people assumed about her body, targeted by a stranger who built a business humiliating women online, and physically shoved by the man she had spent 2 decades beside. So what finally made a woman who had absorbed all of that in silence decide to say the one thing she had never said publicly? And why did it take someone else's death to get her there? Join us as we uncover what changed for Brandi Passante, the version nobody watching Storage Wars ever got to see. The girl who said yes to everything. In 1999, Brandi Passante walked into a carpet cleaning company in Tustin, California, looking for a paycheck, not a future. She was 19, newly arrived from Texas, and had no interest in reality television, because reality television about storage lockers didn't exist yet. What she found instead was a sales manager named Jared Schultz, and within months, a relationship that would define the next 2 decades of her life before she had the chance to define much of anything for herself. The two of them opened a modest second-hand shop in Orange County and called it Now and Then, buying up abandoned storage units and reselling whatever turned up inside them, a name that would prove far more prophetic than either of them realized. Brandi ran the register. Jared ran his mouth, loudly, at every auction he could find. Neither of them had a plan beyond making rent. Then a camera crew showed up. Production had actually come looking for Jared. He was the one with the personality, the volume, and the swagger auction footage needed. Brandi was almost an afterthought. The woman behind the counter nobody planned to put on television, which turned out to be the best accident A&E ever made. But something about her cut through the noise, her dry wit, her total refusal to be impressed by anything Jared dragged through the door, and producers noticed. By December 2010, she was standing next to him in the very first episode of Storage Wars, a woman who hadn't auditioned for fame, hadn't asked for it, and had absolutely no idea what she had just agreed to. It worked immediately. Audiences loved the dynamic. Jared's reckless bidding against Brandi's eye-rolling restraint, the bickering couple who somehow made abandoned junk feel like appointment television. A&E leaned into it hard. By 2014, the network had handed them their own spin-off, Brandi and Jared. Married to the Job, built entirely around a wedding the two of them were supposedly planning. They never actually got married, and it didn't matter, because the show never needed the wedding to happen. It just needed viewers to believe it might. That was the pattern quietly setting in underneath it all. Every version of Brandi the public knew, the sharp-tongued bargain hunter, the reluctant TV bride, the loyal other half of the young guns, had been assembled by cameras, storylines, and an idea of what would keep people watching, none of which were hers. She said yes to the show and every condition that came with that agreement. For a long time, Brandi seemed fine being the woman audiences liked without ever really knowing her. She was funny on camera, cool under pressure, exactly the kind of cast member a producer prays for. What nobody was asking, at least not yet, was how much of that calm exterior was real, and how much of it was just the only version of herself she had been given room to show. Because under all of the ratings, the spin-off, and the auction house charm, something else was already happening to her image, something Brandi hadn't agreed to at all. It started with a lawsuit filed by a co-star she barely spoke to, and it dragged her name into a conversation about her own body she never agreed to have in public. What happens when the person shaping your image isn't a producer anymore, but a total stranger. Her body became a headline. By 2012, Storage Wars was the most-watched show on A&E, and Dave Hester, the loud, combative buyer known to fans as the Mogul, had just been fired from it. He didn't go quietly. Dave filed a wrongful termination lawsuit seeking $750,000, and buried inside the legal filing was an accusation that would follow Brandi for years. That producers had staged entire storage units, planted valuable items to manufacture drama, and, most strikingly, paid for a female cast member to get breast augmentation surgery specifically to boost the show's sex appeal. Dave never named her directly. He didn't need to because, at the time, only 2 women were appearing regularly on the show, and one of them wasn't the one being watched by millions of viewers every week. Speculation did the rest. Tabloids ran the story under Brandi's name before anyone had confirmed a single detail. And for the first time, her body had become a headline she never agreed to be part of. She neither confirmed nor denied that the surgery happened either. The accusation simply hung there, unresolved, folded into her image whether she liked it or not. Was any of it true? Nobody, including Brandi, ever said so on the record. But did that matter once the headline already had her name attached to it? And that wasn't the last time a stranger would decide what story her body was going to tell. In October of 2012, Brandi started receiving strange messages on Twitter. Fans mentioning a video, comments about wanting to see more. Confused, she went looking and found an inappropriate clip posted on a website called Is Anyone Up?, captioned with her name misspelled, but unmistakably aimed at her. The site's operator, a man named Hunter Moore, had built an entire business model around posting explicit images and videos of women without their consent, often paired with their real names and social media profiles, a practice that hadn't yet earned the term revenge porn, but would soon become notorious for exactly that reason. Brandi maintained, from the very beginning, that the video wasn't her. What she had were sleepless nights, a wave of anxiety, and a growing fear that her own family might stumble across it before she could explain. So she did the one thing Hester's lawsuit had never given her the chance to do. She fought back in a courtroom on her own terms, suing Moore for $2.5 million in damages. Moore didn't take the lawsuit seriously. At one point, he emailed her attorney a photograph of himself, taunting her legal team the way he had taunted her online. But in June of 2013, a federal judge ruled in Brandi's favor anyway, ordering Moore to permanently remove the video and barring him from ever distributing it again. The financial award was almost laughably small, just $750, because her legal team hadn't been able to quantify the damage in dollars a court would accept. The number was almost beside the point. For the first time since the cameras started rolling in her direction, Brandi had gone after someone who tried to define her without her permission, and won. It was a small win, but a real one, and it was nothing compared to what was quietly falling apart behind the scenes. While producers were shaping her image and a stranger was stealing her name, the relationship the entire show had been built around was already coming apart, years before a single viewer had any idea. The push that finally ended it. By the time Storage Wars entered its 12th season, filmed in 2018, Brandi and Jared had been together for close to 2 decades. Viewers still assumed the relationship running underneath the auctions was exactly what it looked like on screen. They were watching a rerun of something that had already quietly ended. Season 12 aired that November, with no hint that anything had changed. The split known only inside their own circle. It would take almost 3 more years for the truth to reach an audience. When it finally did, in April of 2021, it arrived without warning, tucked into an ordinary season premiere. Brandi told viewers plainly that she and Jared were no longer a couple. Jared, for his part, acknowledged it too, noting that the two of them could still show up to the same auctions, just no longer as partners in anything but business. The relationship that fans had followed for over a decade, complete with a spin-off built around a wedding that never happened, had actually ended years earlier, off-camera, while the show kept airing footage of a couple that technically no longer existed. What came out afterward painted a far more complicated picture than a simple breakup. Brandi began describing, carefully and without going into much detail, what those final years together had actually felt like. She talked about functioning as her children's primary caregiver almost entirely on her own, about carrying a version of single motherhood long before the relationship officially ended. In a guest podcast appearance the following year, long before she'd launch a show of her own, she put it plainly. She hadn't been allowed to have an identity of her own for years, and only since the split had she started figuring out who she actually was outside of being one half of a television couple. Then, in the spring of 2021, only weeks after the split became public, the story took a darker turn. According to a police report, Brandi had been out with friends at an Orange County bar when Jared arrived. A heated exchange followed, and, according to witnesses, he pushed her twice before finally leaving as tempers escalated further. Officers were called to the scene, but by the time they arrived, Jared was already gone. Days later, when questioned, he denied ever putting his hands on her. The Orange County District Attorney's Office didn't accept that version of events. Jared was charged with 1 count of misdemeanor domestic violence battery. A&E launched its own internal investigation almost immediately, and whatever it concluded, Jared's presence on Storage Wars never fully recovered. He continued bidding separately at auctions for a while, but his role on the show shrank until he stopped appearing as a regular cast member altogether. Brandi, meanwhile, kept going, becoming the only original cast member to appear in every single season the show has ever produced, carrying a franchise that had literally been built around the two of them, now standing in it alone. Jared eventually left the spotlight for good, exiting Storage Wars in 2019 and going on to open his own bar, the Rush Bar and Grill in Lake Forest, California, purchased that same year. He settled into a new relationship with a partner named Rochelle Beckman, building an entirely different life out of the public eye. Storage Wars, meanwhile, didn't stop. The show pushed into a 16th season in June of 2025, still filming 15 years after Brandi and Jared first stood behind that same counter together. The breakup fans found out about in 2021 wasn't the end of anything. It was the moment the public finally caught up to something that had already been true for years. The harder question was what she'd go on to build with everything nobody had let her have before. What Brandi chose for herself. Now and then, the shop where all of this started didn't survive the years in between. The Long Beach location closed first, in 2014, after never turning a profit. The original Orange County store followed in 2016. The place that had put her in front of a camera in the first place was gone before the relationship it was built alongside even officially ended. For the couple, after Jared, Brandi didn't rush toward anything. She spent time figuring out who she was without a partner or a storyline defining her. Just a string of quiet, deliberate choices, the kind nobody had let her make before. The first real sign of that shift came through Clifford Beaver, a real estate agent and bar owner who ran a local spot called Our Place Bar and Grill in Lake Forest, California. The two started seeing each other around 2023, and by May of that year, Brandi made the relationship public herself, on her own timeline, sharing photos on Instagram rather than having a network announce it for her. In an interview the following year, Clifford described her as a blessing to him and his family. Whether the two of them are still together, as of this point, remains genuinely unclear. Some reports from 2025 suggested the relationship may have cooled off, while other coverage well into 2026 described them as still connected, still following each other online, and simply posting less. Nobody outside the relationship seems to actually know. And for once, that ambiguity belongs entirely to Brandi, not to a producer deciding what story to tell about her. Her health became something she started speaking about more openly too. Brandi has lived with Hashimoto's disease, an autoimmune condition affecting the thyroid that can bring fatigue, weight fluctuations, and a long list of exhausting, invisible symptoms. Rather than hiding it, she folded it into the same honesty that had started showing up elsewhere in her life. Treating it as simply one more fact about herself, she no longer felt obligated to soften for an audience. Would the old version of Brandi, the one who spent a decade being edited into someone else's storyline, have ever said that out loud? Probably not. Then, in the summer of 2025, Brandi launched a new project called The Real Reality with Brandi Passante, a show built around sitting down with people from all corners of fame and asking them what that experience actually cost them. For a woman who had spent 15 years being interviewed, filmed, and talked about by everyone except herself, the shift was almost impossible to miss. She wasn't in front of someone else's camera anymore, waiting to be edited into whatever storyline the season needed. She was holding the microphone. None of it looked especially dramatic from the outside, and for once, that was fine with her. For the first time since 1999, Brandi's choices belonged only to her. A bar owner she chose to be with, a diagnosis she chose to speak about, and a podcast she chose to build. Small, ordinary, deliberate decisions made by a woman who had spent most of her adult life having those decisions made for her by others. The hardest decision of all was still coming, and it had nothing to do with romance, health, or business. It arrived as devastating news about someone she had known since the very beginning, and it would ask more of her than any lawsuit ever had. The sentence, she almost didn't post. This wasn't the first time grief had blindsided her in a way the public barely registered. In October of 2020, Brandi's father died. She posted a photo of him holding her as a baby, and one line in the caption stood out from the rest. She wrote that if everyone she loved could just stop dying so close together, that would be great. Nobody reading it at the time understood how literally she meant it. In April of 2026, Brandi Passante found out that Daryl Sheets, one of the original Storage Wars cast members, known to fans for years as the Gambler, had died in Lake Havasu City, Arizona. Police confirmed the cause was a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He was 67 years old, a fixture of the franchise since its very first season. Someone Brandi had known and worked alongside for the better part of 2 decades. She sat with the news for a while before saying anything publicly. When she finally did, late that same night, she posted a tribute to Daryl on Instagram, alongside photos of the two of them together over the years. She wrote that she was at a loss for words, sorry for the circumstances of his passing, her heart going out to his children. And then, in the middle of an ordinary tribute post, she wrote something almost nobody watching had ever heard her say. The relationship that fans had followed for over a decade. Just a single sentence, buried inside a message of grief for someone else. From a woman who had kept almost everything else about her life private for years. She didn't dwell on it. Instead, She used the moment to speak directly to anyone reading who might be struggling themselves, telling them plainly that they weren't alone, that the pain didn't disappear when it was passed on to someone else, and that help was always available. She included the number for the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline directly in her post. She'd stayed silent about her brother for 13 years, through a show built entirely around her personal life, and broke that silence only because someone else's death made staying quiet feel worse than speaking. The lawsuit wasn't hers to choose. Neither was the video, or the relationship the public thought was still real. But the podcast was. The diagnosis she spoke about openly was. And the sentence about her brother, typed, deleted, and typed again before she finally hit post, was hers too. The first thing in almost 20 years nobody had handed her. If Daryl hadn't died, would Brandi have ever told anyone about her brother at all? Or was that always going to stay buried? The one thing the cameras never got. And Jared's side of that bar argument has never really been told in full. Is it fair that only one version of that night got to shape his career, while hers went on to shape her own? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.